Previously on the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast. On June 1st, Elizabeth and her mother-in-law, who were both in New York, received cryptic letters from George. Then, on June 3rd, Elizabeth received a telegram from a friend informing her George was missing. Here's what the New York Times reported on June 7th. The mysterious disappearance of George R. Parks, the actor, is just now the talk of the town. He left his apartment at the Tremont House last week with no information of his intention to leave the city. At first, it was supposed that he would turn up in a day or two, and the idea of a disappearance was scouted. His wife and mother have been in New York, and they arrived in Boston today. Mrs. Parks does not believe that her husband has committed suicide. She told them he was probably laboring under a temporary fit of insanity caused by his mental anxiety. It is only a question of time before he will come back. He was and always has been a good and true husband, and I know that he will return. Once they decided he might actually be in danger, the police, as well as Elizabeth and George's family, spoke with George's colleagues and friends and pieced together the following. The night clerk of the Tremont House where George lived said George came and asked him for stationery on the night of May 31st. The clerk said George thoughtfully counted on the number of his fingers. I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sheets of paper. He again saw George at 11:30 p.m., carrying a 40-pound suit of armor. He watched George take a thick rope and wrap it repeatedly around the armor. When he walked out of the Tremont House, George was wearing a dark checked coat and vest, dark blue striped pants, cloth top shoes, and a brown overcoat. Witnesses said he was cheerful and happy. Fellow actor and friend George Bacchus spoke with him after he'd left Tremont and said he seemed at ease. No one had seen him since. Day after day, the papers reported there was no news. Then, on June 11th, a well-known local thief, Martin Hersham, showed up at the Boston Museum and asked to speak with the theater manager, William Seymour. He offered to tell Seymour where George was if he would pay him a reward first. Seymour refused to pay him and called the police to warn them of the ransom attempt. On the morning of June 12th, 13 days after George had last been seen, a man and his son were fishing in the Boston harbor when they found the body of a little boy who'd gone missing a week before. The men waved down a harbor policeman who took possession of the body in his police boat and proceeded to take it to the morgue. As the police boat neared the shore, the officer sighted another body floating in the water. With the help of 3 other officers, the heavily waterlogged body was placed inside the boat. The officers believed the body was a man named Hosea Beebe, who'd been missing since June 4th. The body was so badly decomposed there was no way to identify him, so they took him to the medical examiner at the morgue. The examiner, Dr. Frank Harris, a former schoolteacher, had known George Parks as a student. He first inspected the contents of the man's pockets. The following items were found in the suit jacket and pants: a penknife, scissors, a gold fountain pen, 2 small pencils, a watch stopped at exactly 1 o'clock, and a book listing the travel schedule for the cast of Held by the Enemy. Inside the book was written, George R. Parks. Additionally, the man's cufflinks were stamped GRP. Dr. Harris then went to the Tremont House to find someone who could identify the clothing. Some men returned to the morgue with him and sorrowfully admitted the clothing belonged to George. Family was not permitted to see the body due to the severe decomposition, but they went to the morgue to identify George's belongings. They recognized everything except the watch and said George normally carried a small gold watch, which was not found on him. Although the armor he carried out of the Tremont house was not found with George's body, authorities believe it was used to weigh him down as he drowned. According to the Boston Post, buckled about the waist of the body was found a leather belt, and attached to the latter was a hook. It is believed that he tied the cord of the bundle containing the armor to this hook, and that the weight of the armor held the body underwater until the cord broke. Investigators believe George entered the water by jumping off the West End Bridge into the Charles River. Tributes to George came pouring in. A fellow Boston Museum employee called him a whole-souled good fellow who would do you a favor if he could, and as often as he could. Edward R. Byram, the Park Theater business manager, asserted, Parks had a splendid career before him. I regarded him as one of the best juvenile actors in the country. The Boston Post claimed, his disposition was good-natured and cheerful, one of the many who are blessed with an aptness to look at the bright side of life. As he was not a man to be despondent, the blow caused by his death in so sad a manner falls all the more heavily on his loving mother and wife. And it did fall heavily on Elizabeth. Just before George's body was found, Elizabeth received the paperwork approving her bank loan. She lamented in her diary, the help that through no one's fault came too late almost broke my heart. Her next entry, dated June 13th, details her initial response to the discovery of George. My darling's body is found in Boston Harbor and taken to the morgue there. Associated Press dispatches and my cousin Charlie Mack's letters I read early in the morning. Send Charlie authority to take the poor body in charge in my name and hold ready for burial till I send for it. I determined to have it buried with my sister Amy and brother Edward in St. Andrews, Staten Island. I loosed my grip on myself and sink into a sort of twilight of semi-consciousness. Visitors come, roses and telegrams from friends. I seem to have spent all my tears, and even feeling is numb. But I am myself tonight, wide-eyed and strangely calm, but with terrible pains in my head. Oh, my darling, I am glad it is I, not you, who suffer in these hard days. Your troubles are all ended, and this one thought I seem to comprehend. All the conscious day I've hugged it to my soul. The next day she began the terrible work of laying her husband to rest. That night she wrote, sleep poorly, wake racked with headache. Mrs. Longstreet brings me rice and cream, breakfast in bed. I stay in bed till noon. Telegram from Charlie that remains and effects will be sent on demand. Call from Cooper the undertaker of Staten Island. Arrangements are made. I telegraphed Charlie to send the body tonight. Charlie replies at 9 p.m. that the remains cannot leave till tomorrow night. A weary day. Although she notified George's family of the funeral service details, they did not attend. Elizabeth laid George to rest with just her one living aunt, her landlord, the pastor conducting the service, and some cemetery staff. When she arrived home from the funeral, her landlady brought her a packet of the things found on George. Elizabeth wrote they were all wet, even yet, and stained in a strong odor of the brine and of death. A terrible sight. Stained collar and bits of seaweed clinging, his gloves, his watch and guard, his knife and scissors and pen and pencil, and a duplicate key to my trunk. I spread his dear possessions out on my bureau to dry, and the room is filled with the salt-sick smell. A hard night. On June 19th, she spent the day in bed and transcribed the words of fellow writer George Eliot into the inside front cover of her diary. The beginning of hardship is like the first taste of bitter food. It seems for a moment unbearable. Yet, if there is nothing else to satisfy our hunger, we take another bite and find it possible to go on. In the absence of a clear motive, the press, family, and friends began putting out theories why George had ended his life. Newspapers published unsubstantiated rumors he had gambling or alcohol addiction. Others said he'd accrued unmanageable debt. The cruelest rumor was that he was heartbroken that his former fiancée, actress Mary Beebe, had jilted him and that he'd never gotten over it. They also published articles with graphic details of the condition of his body when it was found. Elizabeth's landlady made her promise to stop reading the articles about George for 6 months following his death. That seemed to help her regain some peace. She took instead to reading their old letters. She wrote, "God be thanked I've been blessed with love like this. I have packeted my dear husband's letters, and not finding it possible to part with them, I have labeled them to be burned at my death. I must keep them to go over when I find his love less real and tangible. For if this rereading has brought me to tears, it has also brought me renewed rejoicing. There is love enough in the record of our brief married life to live on for all the coming years of widowhood. Few women have been so loved. Dear husband, I thank you for this mighty comfort and love you with all my soul." In 1912, 25 years after his death, Elizabeth wrote a 20-page missive to George from her farmhouse in Sussex, England. The following are excerpts that I believe provide helpful insight into their relationship and how it impacted Elizabeth's life. She begins by writing, "You were sure that death did not end consciousness. You believed in reunion, immortality. If I, no more now than when we were together, can be confident of these things, I have come at least to realize how here upon the earth a great love possesses a great vitality. Love not only may outlast all the forces that threaten survival, I find it does outlast. Apart from the abiding consciousness of you in my soul, I have set down somewhere a brief record of how the actual everyday you came back to me at Chinseagut, how I lived there many days with a vivid sense of you at my side, not that tragic figure clothed with despair, which I never saw in the flesh, and which yet had haunted me for more than 20 years, pretending to be you, coming with a sort of anguish between my newer joys and me. The first time I saw you smiling again was down there in the south. I lived at Chinseagut many days with the vividest sense of your companionship. This came about partly, I think, for I must still be at my old trick of trying to explain on natural grounds, came, quote, naturally, out of your own love of the country, your incurable loneliness in cities. Not memory only serves me here. Your letters are full of a passionate wish to turn your back on art and on ambition and bury yourself and me in some place where was greenness and running water and no people. I hate people. Oh, the times I've heard you say that. Anyway, I find it natural that having got myself away from people so effectually down there at Chinseagut, I should have been so haunted, so happily possessed by you there. Then again last year in England, when I reread the diaries and such few of your remaining letters as I'd brought from the other side of the world, the renewed sense of my great unpaid debt to you for so much devotion came to be mixed more and more with the life of the present. I found you again in Sussex. I remembered, I never forget. Through wintry winter, you had spoilt me with the pansy violets and the lilies of the valley. You were the first to light sandalwood for me, those absurd, delightful prayer sticks of the East, powdered sandal and strange spices mixed with the white Chinese wine and dried on the long splinters of bamboo. In gray weather and grimy cities, you and I burnt joss sticks in many places of our pilgrimage. Never mind if others should call it sentimentality or something, you were the first to shake off the obsession of others, and you, precisely you, would understand my impulse to give our memorials of love and pain and of fire and fine and sun-dried lavender. No one so well as you would understand my wanting to leave those ashes down here, so far from our old restless life, so rid of people, a spot the quietest under the sun. As I write, I feel a little qualms for these few things of yours that remain. They are less well off. Perhaps the analogy holds as well between you and me. Less safe than I feel, than such as are gone back to Mother Earth under the farthest fir tree. But when I left the records of those years in the earth, I did not bury memory. I make no illusion for myself as to the difficulty you would find today in sympathizing with some of my pursuits and with my chief public concern. Yet, why shouldn't I admit that if you had lived, you too would not have remained young, nor of necessity hold the same opinions. You would have grown and changed, and still remained the essential you. Mercy would always have meant more to you than justice. But since the bone and marrow of you was chivalry, how can I suppose life wouldn't have shown you the meaning of the great contest now going on for the freeing of women? Other women, my dear. What if you could not see in the further question just what I see? You would at least have looked through generous eyes. You'd see that as between us, I still care passionately for the spirit of understanding, and little for the letter. I could have leaned on your goodness here, as I did of old in many a lesser issue. First of all, as I have to talk to you about writers, I must count on your forgiving me for being one. Forget your prejudice against the woman of letters. For see, you and I, as of old, are forced to depend on letters for much of our intercourse. You never found it amiss that I should use my pen for writing to you. Only for failing now and then, you blame me. So, since my being in a modest way a woman of letters has given us Chinsegut and this corner of Sussex, and can besides make us close companions again, I call on you to think better of the women of my craft. Thinking better, you must care to help them. This is how. Help them to tell the truth by helping me to tell the truth. I'll confess I've come to hold the theory that practice of the imaginative arts tends enormously to increase this inclination, not to let any story lose in the telling. Just as surely as you were born truthful, I was born romancing. I do not always want to tell the truth, as little when the truth seems harmless or even creditable. There is something in people like me, secret, something that shuns the comprehension of others, like the touch of a too familiar hand. I've been trying painfully for some years now to be myself, not only in secret, openly. With you by, haven't I a chance of learning the brave old wisdom of sincerity? This is of first importance, you'd say, to character, of the first importance to ordinary decency. I say, to the better practice of art, to the better practice by women of the art of writing. You'd never credit the degree to which women, especially gentlewomen, are brought up to hide truth. That is why women have to try to learn women as well as learn men. Women who write, all writers I believe, are deeply interested in the experiences of other writers, the failures and the successes, and all the ways that lead to each and both. I've gone again and again to Stevenson's letters, first for refreshment, for delight, like the thousands who have no personal stake in the business of writing. But it's also true that many a time I could not have kept on with some piece of work, but for his record of how, in spite of pain and illness, disillusionment and stark depression, he kept on. Much as I owe to Stevenson and other men, what I and other women often want is the women writers' experience, and there's so little on record. When I realize what a series of slight chances gave us George Sand, I am humbly grateful there was one of her. One Bronte life, and that at second hand, a master's though it was. What if Charlotte Bronte had written it? Heavens, the beacon it could have lit. No use to tell me with your old triumphant look that I am not Charlotte Bronte, and still less that I am not George Sand. You must have stopped fervently to say, thank God I am not George Sand. I'm ready to admit that these lives are the more significant because of the greatness of what came out of them. But I am bold to say that while the number of great women is as yet comparatively small, any autobiography that is honest must be of interest. Each age, each special stage of the world's development, each country should produce at least one writing woman who should make a picture of her time as it appeared to her, not only of her joys, her conflicts too, and how she either overcame them, or perhaps more significant, how she went down before them. It may be that no man can dimly realize the passion of interest these records would have to other women. Not, of course, to all women, but to this group or that scattered over the world. Such record would not only be of interest, they'd be counsel, support, inspiration, provided they were set down with sincerity. Truth. That is the crux. How shall I, though self-expression has been supposed to be my trade, how shall I deliver the goods? Am I actually any more inclined to stand and deliver the truth than I was at Manchester Square Mansions? Don't expect too much from me all at once. Let me see if just living with you can make me readier to tell the truth. If I don't learn quickly, be patient with me again. I have come in from dinner, served with some little ceremony. That I know I ought to insist on more than ever when I am alone. The modest fare in courses, Adele in cap, buried holly in 2 silver vases on either side of the rich gold of piled oranges. Tomorrow I must have the Bickle candlesticks and dine by candlelight as folk here used to do in the days before I came. I asked Flora to bring me home 2 candle shades on Thursday. The timbered room looks best by candlelight, with the Christmas green showing over white walls, over picture frames, and branching wide out of vases. The weather is warm, but oh, the pleasure of seeing firelight in the old angle. All this has been as usual, but I dressed for you tonight. Added a necklace, piled my hair high. You wouldn't so much as many a man, I think, have minded my growing old, but you'd always have liked me to wear beautiful things. You would be glad my hair was thick still, inclined to set badly of late. Tonight I sat very straight. The symbol here is plain. I would guard a general tendency, mental as well as physical, to slouch. The armchair attitude should come at the very last and be soon ended in that last lying down. I do find that whether through ill health or the relaxing air, or by operation of the eternal law that sliding down is far easier than climbing up, I care less and less how I look, but I must care, because you would have cared. My dear, in some ways, you would have liked the old wife best. Elizabeth lived another 65 years after George died. She became one of the most acclaimed actresses of her generation and wrote best-selling novels. As president of the Women Writers' Suffrage League, she helped turn the tide of public opinion in Great Britain on women's right to vote. She would influence and be influenced by Henry James, Oscar Wilde, Gertrude Bell, and Virginia Woolf. And although she never published the story of her relationship with George, she did write an autobiography called Both Sides of the Curtain, which meets her goal of being honest and of interest to readers in her lifetime and still today. Though he was quickly forgotten by the rest of the world, Elizabeth made an intentional effort to keep his memory alive for herself. She wrote letters to him as if he could read them, and she used their relationship as a template for her main characters in her novel The Open Question, A Tale of Two Temperaments. After reading that book, Mark Twain wrote Elizabeth the following letter. Dear Miss Robbins, a relative of Matthew Arnold lent us your Open Question the other day, and Mrs. Clemens and I are in your debt. I am not able to put in words my feelings about the book. My admiration of its depth and truth and wisdom and courage, and the fine and great literary art and grace of the setting. At your age, you cannot have lived half the things that are in the book, nor personally penetrated to the deeps it deals in, nor covered its wide horizons with your very own vision. And so, what is your secret? How have you written this miracle? Perhaps one must concede that genius has no youth, but starts with the ripenesses of age and old experience. Well, in any case, I am grateful to you. I have not been so enriched by a book for many years, nor so enchanted by one. I seem to be using strong language. Still, I have waited. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Despite her young age, Elizabeth had experienced the deeps Twain referred to. She courageously faced the tragedies she survived and skillfully wove them into stories that live on well past her. She continued to choose to love deeply and invest heavily in those around her. But that is a story for another podcast. Thank you for listening to the Elizabeth Robbins Diary podcast. Would you please consider following and rating the podcast? If you follow us, you'll be notified each time we release an episode. And rating is an easy and free way to help us grow the platform. You may also help us by subscribing to our Patreon account. Your financial support goes directly towards paying the production costs, and you also get perks like exclusive articles and free merchandise. I am deeply appreciative of our mightily talented podcast team. Leif Thomason of Odd Life Studios produces this content as well as editing, mixing, and mastering it. Elisa Babor and Barry Mindel of Roots Creative Co. designed our amazing website and graphics. Randy Olson of Live Oak Theater wrote and performed our theme song, Time is Whispering. The diary entries and majority of the letters referenced in this episode are part of the Elizabeth Robbins Papers at New York University's Fales Library. The Mark Twain letters are courtesy of the Mark Twain Foundation and were copyrighted in 2001. Special thanks to Bob Hurst, the general editor of the Mark Twain Project, for sharing the letters with me. And of course, Elizabeth Robbins, who faced tragedy after tragedy and each time chose to persevere and overcome. In a letter to George, Elizabeth wrote, "The world seems very dreary till I say to myself, I'll spend the morning with my husband. How hurt and grieved, how utterly miserable would he be if he could see my desolation now and feel powerless to help me. I must prove that love is deathless, and that union in spirit is true marriage. His dear letters last night have put me into blessed rapport with him. I am fully conscious once more of the might of his great love, and I will hold it close to my aching heart and let it comfort me afresh. In one of those dear letters, he says, "Ah, would the little wife were waiting for me upstairs with a joss burning." And so, dear heart, I light a joss before your picture, and I am waiting for you once again.